Okay. Hi, Deborah. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Nice to have you with us. Thank you for coming on. I was looking at your bio. It looks very interesting. Your book cover is there, Reef Road. Is this your first novel, or have you written other novels?
This is my third novel, and I would say that all of my novels are in a genre, the name of which I have coined myself. I like to call them identity thrillers. They are, the kind of thrillers that really examine puzzles of identity and the secrets that people keep.
Now, this is based on a true story that your mother was 12 when her best friend was brutally murdered. Uh,
Yes,
I know that,
sadly true. Go
okay.
on.
Um, I just reading through this, and it said that it's not, the book isn't particularly about the story, it was about the effects, the psychological effects, probably on you as later as a child, right?
Very much so. My mother's best friend was murdered on December the 12th, 1948, in Pittsburgh. It is still an unsolved crime. And my mom was supposed to be at her friend's house that night. It was a Friday night. They were 12-year-old girls. And my grandmother, at the last minute, said no, she couldn't go. And the parents had gone out bowling. And when they came home at 11:30 at night, their daughter had been stabbed 36 times. She was not yet dead, but she was pronounced dead at the hospital. And naturally, it horrified and terrified my mother. And particularly, I think, the fact that it was unsolved. So I've thought a lot about it over the years. I've paid close attention to people like Dominic Dunn, whose daughter was murdered, and it certainly influenced the trajectory of his life and career. He became, as we all know, really one of our best known chroniclers of famous salacious murder trials. And someone also like Michelle McNamara, she wrote that book, which became a series, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. And she and the work of other citizen detectives was very instrumental in the sort of the unraveling of a series of crimes in California that they thought were perpetrated by multiple individuals, but turned out to be one man, dubbed the Golden State Killer. So I had all this in my mind. And when the pandemic locked us down in 2020, I thought it was the time to finally start researching this real crime, which then led to the novel. And we can talk about why I fictionalized.
Okay, I did want to ask you though, so just a little bit about the story. So she was left alone in the house when the parents went, and then somebody broke into the house and killed her?
Well, that is the question. It was a row house in Pittsburgh, the kind of townhouse that's attached on either side. There was a door in the back and a door in the front. The parents went out. The dad was adamant he'd locked both doors. She was in the kitchen baking a cake, and the back door had a window with a shade. The shade was partially raised when the parents arrived home, and the back door was unlocked. So there's a great deal of discussion over, did someone knock at the door and she answered the door? Did a lot of suspicion has fallen on her brother over the years? Did he come home and let himself in? There are so many different theories, and I get into them in the book. They're about how someone got into the house and who it was.
You said that you fictionalized it. In what way did you fictionalize? You changed the names and to
Pretty
protect
much, I
the
changed the
innocent.
names. And as I said to my mother, and I'll say to you, I made the writer and her mother a lot less stable than my mother and I actually are. I made them a lot more damaged from the crime than we are. Well, certainly, it has had an effect on the choices we make in life, but I think we function at a higher level. So I fictionalized it mainly because this is a real family that it happened to. I really didn't want to get in the business of poking at that family since so much suspicion fell on the brother, and he's certainly never been convicted of anything. He's still alive. He's in his 90s. I just didn't really want to get into that. And I also think you can winnow down to the essence of what you're trying to say through fiction a lot more easily than you can through nonfiction, because in nonfiction, you can't leave out facts and details. It wouldn't be correct. And in the real case, the real murdered girl had two brothers. I didn't need that extra brother in fiction. It was just messy and confusing.
I don't know why, but for some reason the JonBenet Ramsey case keeps coming into my head while you're talking.
So much.
Yeah.
So much. I've read a lot about that. Very similar case. Bungling of evidence, long, strange time lapses between when police were notified, suspicion falling on a family member, also a brother. In the crime I'm talking about, there was a 7-year age difference, and the girl was 12 and the brother was 19. So he was an adult. He worked at the railroad yard in Pittsburgh. It was 1948. A great deal was written about his time sequence, his visibility at work that night. There were lags. There were people who said they saw him, and then they retracted it, and then they recanted the recant. A lot of strange stuff.
When did you find out about this? Did your mother tell you as a child, or how did you find out?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've always known, but I certainly know my mother wouldn't have told me at the youngest age. But somewhere in adolescence, I knew about it, and I knew my mom was overprotective with me and, security conscious, certainly at home. The home alarm system was a fabulous invention for a woman like my mother. It gives her a lot of comfort to be able to, tap her little code in and feel safe at home. So I feel like it's always been there for me.
Let me take something off of your bio that I saw was interesting. You mentioned COVID. I know that a lot of people had the opportunity with the lockdowns to write that book they've been meaning to get around to. And as a matter of fact, this show came out of COVID as a result of that, because there were so many authors that were writing that we decided to put a separate show together from my other show. So interesting how COVID sort of spawned a lot of creativity in people, which I'm happy about. Okay, I'll just read this one. The role generational trauma plays in the novel.
Well, generational trauma is a huge subject, and I've recently read a nonfiction book called It Didn't Start With You by a writer whose name I believe is Mark Wolynn, Wollynn, and it has blown my mind. So Reef Road has huge aspects of generational trauma from a more philosophical point of view, from an intellectual point of view. But in this nonfiction book, he really talks about a genetic aspect of generational trauma. He talks about experiments done in mice where a certain smell is introduced, followed by an electric shock, and 2 generations later, the grandchildren of those mice, when they smell the same smell, demonstrate anxiety and stress. So it's kind of a fascinating subject that I think we're just scratching the surface of. And it's not new. I mean, it's in the Bible. It's in the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the sins of the father. We've been talking about this for a long time. And how do you escape it? How do you change your destiny and the destiny of your family?
Do you have children?
I have 2 children and 4 stepchildren and 6 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
we have a lot.
How do you think that this affected you as a mother, if it did at all?
I think I have a heightened awareness of things that can go wrong in the world. My husband would call it, although he didn't coin this phrase, black swan thinking. He's in the finance world, so he thinks about statistics and probability. And, the black swan is an outlier. And but I tend to look at the world in a very black swan kind of way, that anything is possible at any time.
Were you an overprotective mother?
Maybe in some ways. I'm certainly an over-worrying mother, and still I have grown children. And I think I definitely have that strain.
We've got just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to just give the viewers a little bit of insight about you. You're in media. You started as an actress. And you were on All My Children, is that correct?
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest, came to New York after I danced in a big United Artists movie and did a bunch of commercials and then got a huge starring role on All My Children, which was, anybody my age would know, it was a big soap at the time. And then I ended up having a 10-year career in film and television into the early 90s when I switched to the other side of the camera and started, I ended up as the story editor at Miramax Films. And a story editor is like a book editor. So in a funny way, it was a natural transition and became my slow progression to writing on my own. I think there are a lot of writers who come from the editorial seat into the writing seat. And it was a slower path for me. I was raising children. I went through a divorce, remarriage, and I spent a lot of time in great writing groups and now have published 3 novels of my own.
Okay, are you working as a writer full-time? I mean, is that what you do now?
Well,
Or
well, do you mean am I earning a real living at it? Yes, I'm working full time as a writer, and the other answer's up for debate. I do sit on boards. I'm on the board of New York Botanical Garden and on the advisory board of the American Film Institute and a variety of other institutions. So I have, not-for-profit work I do. My husband and I have done a lot of historic preservation. So I'm involved to a degree with some of the things. We've restored a cinema. I'm still chairman of the board of this not-for-profit cinema, a hotel. I'm very involved with the hotel. So I do a lot of things.
okay, I see Gene Wilder's name on here. What was
Yes.
what was your relationship with him?
So this cinema we restored, the Avon in Stamford, Connecticut. Gene lived in Stamford with his beautiful wife, Karen, and he was very involved with the Avon, and we developed a close friendship, my husband and I, he and his wife, and we had a writing correspondence. And one day he said to me, "Are you a writer? I think you're a writer." And he offered to read something I'd written, so I sent it to him. And every time I would see him from that day to the day he died, he'd say, "Are you writing? You should be writing." So there was this magical moment where I was an empty nester, Gene Wilder died, and I thought, I really need to do this. If I'm going to do this, I need to get serious and do it. And I did it.
Did he it sounds like he encouraged you. Did he actually get anything of yours produced?
He did not. No, he was just a cheerleader, a very, very kind cheerleader.
Okay, this was after he was married to Gilda, right? This was after she died.
Yes. So we were close with Gene and his wife, Karen, and they were married for, 35 years or something. Gilda had this beautiful farmhouse in North Stamford, and she left it to Gene when she died. And he later met and married a beautiful woman named Karen. And that's where they lived.
Well, we do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. It's my name, DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com.
Okay.
So think of the tires, think of the car.
And the book Reef Road is out now. When was it released?
It's released Tuesday, January 10th.
Oh, coming up next week. Okay. Available for pre-order, I assume?
Oh, yes, please pre-order. I bless you.
Okay, great. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for coming on. It was nice meeting you, nice chatting with you. Best of luck with the book launch. I hope it does well.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine.